Hello, everyone. Welcome to Elephants in the Room, where we'll be tackling the big topics like mental health, technology, the LGBTQ, and more. Our goal is to encourage and empower parents to be bold in having difficult conversations with their kids and teens. We have 6 awesome speakers that we can't wait for you to hear. Thank you for joining us.
Well, good morning. Thank you for successfully springing forward. I really appreciate that. I do feel like I drew the short straw a little bit on this morning because it's like 8, like your 8 a.m. college class, except Jared, you got, it's like you're dragging all your kids with you to class too. So it's doubly difficult. So really appreciate all you guys coming, making the effort to be here early. I'm honored to wrap this series up. And by the way, let's thank Emily and Abby, by the way, for their great work in this series. I don't have a basket for you guys. I'm sorry. I'll bring you one maybe on Monday. I definitely will not be bringing you a basket. Speaking to you this morning as a student of the Bible, as a student of culture, but also, and maybe most importantly, as a fellow parent. My daughter Emma got married this past summer. Emma, are you in here? Yeah, okay. Emma and Monica are in here. And I remember the week before she got married, there was a point when, that kind of hit me, and all of you parents who've been down that road, you probably can relate to this. I remember just kind of sitting in my recliner, and you know how like when they say when you're about to die, your life, flashes before your eyes. Well, in this case, it was like, truthfully, it was like all of my failures as a dad just kind of flashed before my eyes, and I remember just kind of tearing up, sitting there thinking about my daughter. Is my job is more or less done in terms of raising her, and it was hard for me to not focus on all the failures and all the mistakes, because we're human, right? We're flawed. And truth be told, and I would say this if Emma wasn't in here, she really was just a beautiful child and gave us almost no trouble at all. The problems in terms of the parenting child relationship are almost all my fault, and that's the truth. And so, it can be difficult to give yourself grace, can it, as a parent? It can be difficult to give yourself, forgiveness and mercy, and realize that your kids are probably a lot more resilient than you think, and they can overcome your mistakes just like you have overcome your own parents' mistakes. Every parent is a human first and foremost, and that means that we're going to stub our toe pretty regularly, and we hope to get better. We hope to have fewer mistakes as we go, but they're always going to be there because we're human. But on the other side of the coin, it wouldn't be a good use of our time to just sort of sit around and pat each other on the back and commiserate and say, well, we've all made mistakes. It's going to be okay. We actually have to talk about the fact that culturally, the wolves are at the door, and perhaps there's never been a more difficult time to be a parent than right now. And maybe there have been lots of generations who have said that. I get it, but I really do believe that we are facing really unprecedented cultural situations today that are making it more and more difficult to be a godly Christian parent and for your kids to be godly Christian children. I thought and prayed about how to sort of summarize this series, and so I hope you'll be patient with me as I just kind of share some thoughts. And I want to start in Exodus 32. This maybe feel like a really strange place to begin. Exodus 32 is the very the very famous story of the golden calf. The Israelites, God has led the Israelites out of Egypt, out of slavery and bondage, and now they've come to the base of Mount Sinai. They're meeting God. God is giving them the law. And Moses has disappeared up on top of the mountain, and he hasn't returned, and what are we going to do? And here's what it says, starting in verse 1, Exodus 32. When the people saw that Moses was so long in coming down from the mountain, they gathered around Aaron and said, "Come, make us gods who will go before us. As for this fellow Moses who brought us out of Egypt, we don't know what's happened to him." Aaron answered them, "Take off the gold earrings that your wives, your sons, and your daughters are wearing and bring them to me." So all the people took off their earrings and brought them to Aaron. He took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioned it with a tool. And they said, "These are our gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." When Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival for the Lord." So the next day the people rose early and sacrificed burnt offerings and presented fellowship offerings. Excuse me. Afterward they sat down to eat and drink and got up to indulge in revelry. Then the Lord said to Moses, "Go down, because your people, whom you brought up out of Egypt, have become corrupt." And we'll stop there. So Aaron, I'm sure most of you are familiar with this very famous story from the Old Testament. He's Moses' brother, and he makes this golden calf, and he says, "Here's your God who brought you up out of Egypt." And what's so unbelievably sad and ironic about it is that they took earrings out of their ears, and those very ears are the ears with which they heard the very voice of the one true God say, "I am your God who brought you out of Egypt." And they pull those earrings out of the ears with which they heard the one true God, and they fashion for themselves a golden idol, and they begin to worship it and say, "This is our God." Unbelievable. But there is a misconception about this story. And it took me, it was really actually only a few years ago when I first recognized this or noticed it. And that is, it's not that Israel is completely worshiping this God. Notice in verses 4 and 5, it says, he took what they handed him and made it into an idol cast in the shape of a calf, fashioning it with a tool. Then he said, "These are your gods, Israel, who brought you up out of Egypt." This is plural. I thought there was just one calf here. But then he says, when Aaron saw this, he built an altar in front of the calf and announced, "Tomorrow there will be a festival to the Lord." Now in the Old Testament, when you see the word Lord, all caps, that is a reference to the covenant name of God, Yahweh. In Hebrew, it's 4 capital letters that represent the name of Yahweh. I mean, there are generic names for God. There's several generic names for God in Hebrew, but when you see in our English translations, Lord, all caps, that is Yahweh, the covenant God. And so what's happening is, to put it very simply, they hadn't abandoned the Lord. They had not abandoned Yahweh. They had instead added a golden calf, because you see it says they plan to have a festival to the Lord the next day. And then it says that they offered fellowship offerings and burnt offerings. That's the Lord part. And then they indulged in revelry, which is the golden calf part. Scholars call this syncretism. In other words, we're merging essentially two gods or two religions together. Now, what does this have to do with what we're talking about this morning? Well, what it has to do with is we, as ridiculous as this seems to us, tend to do the same thing. In other words, all of us sitting here are worshipers of Yahweh. I assume we are. Most of us are, at least. And we profess the name of God, and we say we're followers of Jesus, but in such often insidious ways, we allow other gods to sort of worm their way into our hearts. Would you agree with that? Not fully awake this morning, but I can assure you that that's pretty common. I can assure you that has happened in my life, and it continues to be a battle in my life. The Bible talks about idolatry more than just about anything. But the problem is that we live in a culture in which we don't see pagan temples on every street corner. So when we read the Bible and we read idolatry-related texts, we don't tend to for whatever reason, think that applies to us. And I would submit to you that it applies to us perhaps more than any culture that's ever existed, because we are a culture that is filled with idols. It's just that we don't recognize them as such. We've been in a series that has talked about things like technology and drugs and alcohol and mental health. And what we need to understand is that underpinning this entire series is the human urge to chase after other gods. Now, maybe you haven't thought of it in those terms, but I believe that's exactly what we're talking about. In other words, let's think about technology, which has been one of the classes that you've sat through recently. The average American spends around 12 hours a day consuming various kinds of media and technology. Psychologists tell us that this is actually very literally rewiring our brains. Our thoughts and our values and our worldview are beginning to be morphed into what we consume through technology. And so technology easily becomes an idol. We talked about drugs and alcohol. We know that God has called us to a sound mind, and that's what He desires for us. But when we're consuming drugs and alcohol, we begin to reorder our entire lives, our time, our money, our thoughts, in reference to the substance that we're chasing. And so drugs and alcohol become an idol, a pagan god. Even mental health. Awareness of mental health is obviously incredibly important, but a constant fixation on my own anxiety can even become a pagan god, an idol. And then you throw in the gods of pleasure and success and money, power, fame. We're swimming in potential pagan gods. But the most important, the most dominant, the most powerful, and the most insidious god, pagan god, false idol in our cultural context, and by the way, it's always been this way, is the god of the self. You see, we don't need a golden calf anymore. You don't need a golden calf. I don't need a golden calf. I have me. Because in American culture, I'm being taught to worship me. You're being taught to worship you. It's the most ancient God of all. I mean, Adam and Eve dealt with it. God said, don't eat the fruit. And they said, and then the devil says, hey, if you eat the fruit, you'll be like God. In other words, you can be your own God. And they're like, give me some of that fruit. And from then on, every human being has had to wage battle against that temptation to be their own God. The difference, though, is that in modern Western culture, we've managed to turn self-worship not into a vice, but into the goal. Are you following me? Not yet. It's okay. It's spring forward morning. You see, the denial of self, classically, has been thought to be a good and noble thing. And American culture has somehow managed to turn denial of self into a terrible, toxic thing. If you open your eyes, you'll see this everywhere. We've turned the idea of being guided by our own desires, which classically has been understood to be a bad thing, into the chief aim in life. Now, again, if you think I'm exaggerating, just try to open your eyes to the media and the technology that you're consuming, to your movies, to your televisions, to your music, to the internet, to, my goodness, Instagram, and you will see it everywhere. Everywhere. Kim Kardashian. I'm hesitant to throw this up here. This is the most overexposed person in the history of the world, so I don't want to promote her any more than she already is, but notice what she says. I've chosen myself. Typical, classic. That's what you would expect in the cultural context in which we live today. Now, one of the questions that I want to visit for a few minutes is, how do we get here? Now, we don't have time to delve into the deep end of the pool on this. So I want to just kind of give you a little bit of a summary of how we have arrived at this cultural moment. Now, all of us are aware that the 50s and particularly the 1960s was what in the United States we call the sexual revolution. And so what you might call the canon of sexual practices have been greatly expanded since then. So in other words, a more and more permissive culture accepting more and more sexual expression. So you think of Hugh Hefner, you think of, the growing pervasiveness of pornography, coupled with the decline of faith. And we have arrived at a culture in which sort of anything goes. But I think it's a mistake to think of it only in those terms. Now, you got to put your thinking cap on a little bit and follow with me here. It's not just the expansion of what's considered legitimate sexual behavior that we're talking about. It's not as if, gay marriage is not accepted back then and now it is. It's not just that changing one's biological sex was unheard of back then and now it's commonplace. It's deeper than culture simply becoming more permissive. You see, for many decades, there has been a subtle and gradual evolution in the understanding of the self. And this is key. Traditionally, a human being, the self is defined by externalities. In other words, we are shaped and we are defined by our community. In other words, our community tells us what is good and right, and our goal is to conform to community standards in which we grew up. The goal today, though, is that, put it this way, not the goal, but today institutions and culture are generally encouraging the opposite. So here's what I mean by that. If you remember psychology, if you ever sat in psychology class and you learned a little bit about Sigmund Freud, you may remember that Freud taught that the truest part of who I am is buried inside me. And it's suppressed. It's the level of the unconscious. And so the goal is to sort of go in there, mine in there and dig out that part of me that is buried. And the deepest, most hidden, suppressed part of me is sexual. And so Freud took sex, and this is key, okay? This is extremely important that you understand this. Freud took sex from something you do to something that you are. Does that make sense? So the Bible doesn't typically speak of people this way. In the Bible, sexual acts are things that we do. If a thing is sinful, God expects us to change that behavior. Would you agree? But in Western culture, particularly the last 30 years, and especially in the last 10 years, I define myself by my inner feelings. So the goal is to discover my innermost self, that Freudian, hidden, suppressed self, to pull that out, and then to be authentic means that my external matches my internal. So in other words, who I should be is not determined by what is external to me. Who I should be and who I really am is defined by myself. It is defined by my innermost being. Traditionally, again, the goal in personal development is conformity to what the community says is right and good. Who I should be is determined by people and contexts that are external to me. But our current culture is Freudian, and it says that the true self is the inner self. And so what I feel is truly who I am. The goal is, again, authenticity, which means the outer matches the inner. And so you get phrases such as follow your heart or be true to yourself. That's where those type phrases come from. That's what they're rooted in. Now, this inevitably becomes political. I want you to, again, try to follow me here. This is very important. So let's say that we have a law banning same-sex marriage. Traditionally, what is sex? What is sexual behavior? Well, it's something I do. And so a law banning same-sex marriage is a ban on something, on an activity, right? Laws related to sexuality historically have been about guarding the family unit, what's best for culture in general. But if my innermost feelings determine who I am, and my feelings, for instance, tell me that I'm gay, the law is no longer condemning my actions. The law is now condemning my very self. Does that make sense? So in the past, homosexuality, for instance, was a set of acts, a set of behaviors. Today, homosexuality is an identity. It's not just what I do, it's who I am. And that's key, that's very crucial. Which has led us to things like this. And I'm not making fun. This is just where we are as a culture. President Biden's advisor over nuclear energy is this guy who wears stilettos and discusses sex with animals. Now, even as recently as 10, 15 years ago, this probably would not have happened. But this man, that's who he thinks he is internally, and to be authentic, he has to express the same externally. This is no longer about behavior. This is about his actual self. So in other words, we're no longer in a cultural context in which we can condemn actions without condemning, as they would view it, without condemning the person. That's really important. Okay. Here's another one. Judges across the country denied custody to parents who refused to give children transgender medical treatments. I consider this child abuse. I consider this utterly abhorrent. But if you're Freudian and if you're following the stream of culture, these children who have never even experienced sexuality, who don't even understand what changing your biological sex means, they're parents who are running into legal traps because they won't allow their underage children to become transgender or receive transgender treatment. This is staggering to me. And yet this is where we are in our cultural context because of what I tried to explain a minute ago. Now, the church faces even more intense version of this same problem. Because again, if my innermost feelings define who I am, my highest goal is to live out my authentic identity, to be my true self. And so the church seems to be saying that my true self is unacceptable because sexual actions like that are sin. And so again, it's not just that the church is condemning my actions, it's condemning my very identity. And so people on that side would say, you're against my very existence. Now, what is the Christian response, or what is a Christian response to all this? The Christian view, the biblical view, is that ultimate authority over me isn't internal, it is external, right? It's not my own feelings and desires, but it's God and God's desires and his wishes for me that rule over me. So culture says, again, follow your heart. The Bible says the heart is deceitful and fallen and corrupt. My fleshly nature, the Bible says, wars against who and what God has called me to be. Culture says, be true to yourself. Jesus says, deny yourself. Often to follow our own inner desires, the Bible says, is actually rebellion against God. And it leads to fallenness and deep pain. So can my feelings and emotions ever be my guide? This is kind of ironic. I would suggest that, yes, sometimes your emotions and your feelings can be your guide, but only if and only when they have been tempered and trained to come into conformity with the will of God. So does that make sense? In other words, the only time your inner self can be your guide is when it's guided by the external authority of God. So, to put it simply, God is always, no matter what, under every circumstance, God is always the ultimate authority and the ultimate guide. Now think about this phrase. I'm a woman trapped in a man's body. We hear that sort of thing expressed a lot. Now, what you know about when someone says that, or when you're inside a culture that essentially accepts that as true, what we know is that feelings have been exalted above all other authority and all other evidence. When, several years ago, when Bruce Jenner, one of the greatest athletes of our time, macho man, becomes, he transitions into becoming a woman, he says, I'm now free. He said this in an interview, I'm now free to be my true self, my authentic self. Look at this slide. This is from formerly Bruce Jenner, now known as Caitlyn Jenner. Always have the courage to embrace your true self. Now look at I don't know how well you can see the artwork there, but it's like you're unzipping this suit, your external covering, and then your true self is emerging from that. So the Christian worldview says, in response to that, our human bodies are created by God, and they are under God's authority. God embodied us exactly as He chose. Our bodies show us what sex or gender we are. Sex and gender used to be the same thing, by the way. It shows us what we are. Our bodies show us what sort of sexual behaviors are acceptable by the nature of whether our bodies are male or female. There is nothing that says, I will be my own God, more than refusing to accept God-ordained biology of my body. And so to allow my feelings and emotions to become the final arbiter of truth is to remove God from the throne and replace Him with myself. As I said before, today we don't need a golden calf. I have me and you have you. We're swimming in self-worship. And if you'll pay attention, you'll see it everywhere. American culture today is literally a giant cult devoted to the God of self. Cultural mantras, and I mean mantra literally as in like a religious mantra. You hear things like, you do you, right? We hear that all the time. Some of you say that, right? Be true to yourself. Love yourself first. The answers are all inside you. Or my personal favorite, this is my truth, right? All of these are expressions of worship at the altar of the false pagan god of self. And with all our might, people, with all our might, Jesus' followers must resist the worship of this idol. Underlying every false god, whether it's technology, whether it's drugs and alcohol, whether it's sexuality, lurks the god of self. And we must learn these things, be convicted of them, and teach them to our children. Now, this has been sort of a theological, sociological, psychological, terribly quick overview to get us to where we are today. So now, real quickly, we're about out of time, and let me just very humbly give you some thoughts that are very practical. The first thing is we must wake up to the reality of the God of self cult. We lose every fight we don't know we're in, don't we? Please understand that you are in a fight in terms of the God of self cult. Number two, if I follow Jesus, My innermost feelings are not my God. You hear that? That's unbelievably important. If you are a follower of Jesus, your innermost feelings are not your primary authority. They are not your God. All your heart, mind, soul, and strength are under the authority of Jesus Christ. God is God, and I'm not. And it's so important that we learn the difference, isn't it? Freud was wrong. My feelings do not determine who I should be. Culture's God of individual authority resists conformity. Don't tell me what to do. Don't tell me how to be. How dare you judge me? But Scripture says again and again to not conform, but to be transformed. Romans 12, verse 2. Number 3, although we're swimming in the culture of self, recognize that you are your kids' most important influence. Your voice will always be louder and stronger, no matter how loud and strong the voice of culture is shouting. Your voice is stronger and louder in the life of your children. And that's because God made it that way. Did you know that? Did you know that God wired us as human beings so that our parents would have a greatly outsized ability to speak into the lives of our children, into the hearts of our children? And even when you think they're not listening, parents of teenagers, they are. Far more than you realize. They are listening. Your voice is strong and powerful. Do not ever minimize your voice with your children. It is so important that you do that. And by the way, along this line, I think we all know this, but it bears reminding that as wonderful as our children's ministry is, as wonderful as our youth ministry is, as wonderful as our preaching is, as wonderful as anything we could do here at Southwest, this church cannot do this for you. It cannot, it will not, it cannot do this for you. This is your job, parents. Your job is to disciple your own children. This church can help you. This church can assist you. This church can help you with wisdom and guidance, but it cannot do it for you. You are the primary discipler of your own children. If you don't hear anything else today, hear that. You must disciple your own kids. Number 4, admit to yourself that you can't hide your true self from your kids. I wish I could, but I can't. If you're worshiping the idol of self, they'll know it. Whatever other false idol you're worshiping, they'll know it. If I were to go and ask your kids, hey, tell me about what's most important to Dad. Tell me about what's most important to Mom. I can guarantee you they can tell me. Now, hard question. If I actually went to your kids and asked them, what would they say? What would they say about you? What would they say about you? What are your highest priorities? That's an incredibly important question. And then number 5, talk freely about faith, culture, and worldview in daily life. Perhaps this is the most important thing I'll say. One of the things that I think that Monica and I did well usually is I would ruin movies and TV shows by stopping right in the middle and having a little lecture about how this is an attempt to indoctrinate. We would have after action reviews, as they say in the military, right? We would talk about things that we were watching and listening to. We would talk about the news, and we would talk about the sometimes subtle, sometimes overt attempts to bring unbelievable bias, right? We have to have those conversations with our kids. It's an everyday thing. It can't happen. Parents, listen, it can't happen just on Sundays. Again, this church can't do it for you. Did you hear what I said earlier? The average American consumes 12 hours of tech and media every day. Do you think a couple of hours on Sunday is going to be enough to confront that? Of course not. You, as parents, have to be engaged in everyday conversation with your children about these things. I remember one time, this is years ago, I had a college student in my ministry in Russellville, and she came to me and wanted to talk, and she said, I just need I just want to talk about this. She said, my dad has been nominated to be an elder at our church. And I said, oh, that's great, And she said, well, I want to feel excited about it, but the truth is, I've never once in my whole life heard my dad talk about church or faith or God any time except at church my entire life. So, realize that as they make daily choices, as your kids make daily choices, we're here to help them think biblically, to not allow them to just simply follow the wisdom of culture. Because if you don't resist, you and they will just sort of meander down the stream of culture, and it will take us wherever it wants us to go. So last thing, I know we're out of time. Let's go to the last slide. I read a book last week that was it's called Destroyers of the Gods, and it's about how our Christian culture in the Roman Empire, as it grew, it began to essentially destroy all of the pagan gods of the Roman culture. And there were many, many, many pagan gods in Roman culture. And so as Christianity spread, those gods, those idols just began to disappear. And as I was reading that book, I thought, that's actually a great paradigm for thinking about parenting. So go and be in the lives of your kids, be a destroyer of all the pagan gods that are warring for their heart. That's it. Good to be with you this morning.